I'm Paige.
I'm Preston.
I'm Sam.
I'm Emma.
And we're going to talk today about Ruth Bader Ginsburg for our Management 4700 class. Ruth lived a wonderful 87 years. She was born on March 15th in 1933 in Brooklyn, New York, and unfortunately passed away on September 18th of 2020. Ruth had such a great impact on society, and she lived up to her quote about how she wanted to be remembered. She wanted to be remembered as someone who used whatever talent she had to do work to the very best of her ability, and to help repair tears in society, to make things a little better through the use of whatever ability she has, to do something outside of myself. Ruth fought hard for justice in society, and Sam is going to tell you a little bit more about Ruth's life and her leadership style.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg was born on March 15, 1933 in Brooklyn, New York. All her life, Ruth was known to be extremely intelligent, and in 1950 she started at Cornell University and graduated in 1954. During her first year, she would meet her husband, Marty Ginsburg, on a blind date, and in 1955 they would have their first daughter, Jane, and in the fall of 1956 she would begin her education at the Harvard Law School. Ruth joined the Harvard Law Review, a student-run journal, and was the first woman in history to be a part of this organization. She would eventually transfer to the Columbia Law School because of the problems she was facing in the Harvard Law program. She would graduate from Columbia Law in 1958, and during her time, she worked hard to balance her life in and outside of school. From that point on, she started her career, and over the years, she would continue to grow immensely. Ruth would become the first tenured female professor while teaching at Rutgers and Columbia. In 1980, Jimmy Carter appointed her to the U.S. Court of Appeals in Washington, D.C., and in 1993 was appointed to the Supreme Court by President Bill Clinton. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was a woman who stood strongly in her beliefs but knew how to do it in a respectable way. Many people viewed Ruth to be a highly respectable woman, even if their beliefs did not line up. She was highly in favor of women's rights, workers' rights, gender equality, civil rights, and separation of church and state. Ruth was active on the Supreme Court from 1993 to 2020 until her passing on September 18, 2020. The legacy that Ruth Bader Ginsburg left behind is one that is still alive today and continues to inspire many people.
Now going to get into one of Ginsburg's most powerful quotes from a leadership perspective. This quote really stood out to me personally because of how much it resonates with what we've been discussing in class. And this quote is, "Fight for the things you care about, but do it in a way that will lead others to join you." And this is one of Ruth's most well-known and famous quotes, and it not only applies to young women, but it also applies to everybody in general. Any aspiring leaders can take this piece of advice to help themselves grow as leaders and become better leaders. It really shows how passionate she was about leadership and young women following her legacy, which we look back to what we've been discussing in class. It really resonates with legacy. And by fighting for what they want, but also guiding others to do the same. Now we're going to get into a couple of quotes that were said about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. We actually chose quotes that didn't directly talk about her, but rather her husband and how he admired his wife and admired her success and intelligence and overall respected her as a leader.
Justice Ginsburg herself says that it was Marty who talked to people and lobbied them and just made sure that at least she was under consideration because he really felt she was brilliant and she deserved it and it would be good for the country.
A lot of people did not want Ruth at law school because she was a woman. She went against the odds and worked very hard during college and graduate. After graduation, Ruth was applying for jobs. She was having no luck. No one wanted to hire her because she was a mother and she was Jewish. Because of this, she resorted back to teaching law. She was one of the only women in teaching law. She also worked as a volunteer lawyer to help with equal rights and much as she could. She took on a case to help women who was getting treated unfairly in the Air Force and took it to the Supreme Court. Ruth explained to these 9 judges that it was unfair how men were treated better than women. They agreed with Ruth and decided it was time to change the laws. Ruth made such an impact that she convinced many other judges to change their laws that weren't fair towards women. Soon after that, Ruth became a judge. Ruth was so loved and good at her job that she was asked to be one of the 9 justices in the Supreme Court. She was the second woman to ever do this. Ruth made such a positive impact on equal rights, and she will always be remembered as one of the greatest leaders of all time.
A woman of conviction, courage, and quiet compassion, says Chief Justice John Roberts. Ruth Bader Ginsburg will leave behind a legacy that many should follow and learn from. In a time where women had to work a lot harder to be in positions usually held by men, she worked long and hard hours in her career, school, and life. She was determined to get where she wanted to be and stood strong in her beliefs. She was respectful but also a force to be reckoned with. Ruth Bader Ginsburg will always be remembered as a strong-willed woman who stood strong for human rights and fought for what she believed to be right and moral.